Joining us now, I'm very pleased to say, is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Associate of Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, welcome back to the U.S. Report for 2025. And let's start here because we're starting a new year, but President Biden is saying goodbye. He yesterday delivered his final address to the American people, which was received as one of the worst farewell speeches in presidential history. Now, Mick, I thought this was typically Biden. He started out positive and gracious, and then he got dark, weird, and conspiratorial about all of his perceived enemies. What was your take on it?
James, it's good to see your face. Happy belated New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, my friend.
I watched the thing, and I had the same reaction, which is, oh my goodness gracious, what has he been doing to the country to the last 4 years to make it so exposed and it's so at risk as he laid out in that speech? You know, the whole mantra during the campaign was that Donald Trump was an existential threat to the country, that somehow the country is so weak that Donald Trump was going to absolutely take it over. And then last night, now it's an oligarchy that is an existential threat to the United States of America. Again, I say to these folks, you have been in power for the last 4 years. You're supposed to make the country stronger, not weaker. And what was this message on the way out the door? But look, he's an old man. I see so much of my parents in their last days that I see in him. I have nothing but sympathy for him. But it is time for him to go, and thankfully that time is upon us.
Yeah, and, you know, he has gone, but not without doing a fair bit of damage along the way, as you suggest. And you've written a great piece in The Hill magazine this week detailing President Biden's final weeks in office and how he's used them to implement and address a whole bunch of things that voters rejected back in November. Talk us through some of these sort of backdoor, behind-the-scenes actions that he's done that are going to saddle the Trump administration with a whole bunch of new problems trying to undo that legacy.
Yeah, well, a couple of different things, James. He took a bunch of our offshore drilling areas and took them off of the market, essentially, permanently. Now, we're going to try and figure out during the Trump administration how to undo that, but Biden tried to do that on the way out the door, take millions of acres off of the market for potential energy production. He then cut a deal with a bunch of federal workers using an executive authority he has to say, you know what? I don't care what Trump is going to say. You don't have to come to work, federal employees, for at least the next 4.5 or 5 years. You get to work from home. Even though the rest of the world is going back into the office, you get to stay and work at home. Wink, wink, nod, nod. We all know you don't work when you're at home, but that's the deal I'm giving you. And of course, we all know about the deal he cut with his son, Hunter, on the way out the door. It's almost as if the dialogue between him and the American public was this: oh, American public, please elect me or my surrogate, Kamala Harris, and I'll give you the most progressive policies I possibly can. The electorate looked at him and said, thanks, but no thanks. They elected Donald Trump. And Joe Biden's response to that is, oh, great. Well, listen, here, I'm going to give you anyway what you didn't want. And here's my gift to you on the way out the door. It's just bizarre. My guess is, James, on a more serious note, it will lead to a discussion in this building behind me right now, to a discussion about whether or not the presidential authority should be limited during this lame duck period. That's how upset Republicans are here in Washington over how Biden spent his last days in office.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mick. We have something in Australia and in parliamentary countries called a caretaker period, where basically no policies can be done when you're in that sort of mode. But maybe it is time for something like that in the United States. I want to move on, though, to something else happening in that building behind you, which are these confirmation hearings for members of Donald Trump's cabinet. I'm going to play you a couple of different grabs from that in a moment. But overall, what have you made of the hearings so far? I've been quite impressed with Trump's nominees, and I think for the most part, they're looking a lot safer than a lot of the noise that was coming out a few weeks ago suggested. What's your take?
They are certainly looking a lot safer. It looks like Pete Hegseth is going to be confirmed. Like, I think everybody who's at a hearing so far is probably going to get confirmed. But it's not just that they're safer, James. They're more not aggressive is not the right word, but they're more willing to sort of take on these BS kind of questions that they're getting from the Democrat senators. You're seeing pushback. You're not seeing them sort of grin and bear it while the Democrats essentially lie about either Donald Trump or about them individually. Pam Bondi was very assertive. Pete Hegseth didn't back down. Even some of the folks that don't make the national attention or the international attention have been very sort of sort of solid in their defense of why they are conservative, why they are working for Donald Trump, what the policies are that Trump wants to put in place. As a former member of the previous administration, it's been really exciting for me to see this team coming in that is not embarrassed about the policies that they intend to push forward. In fact, they are assertively defending them and selling them to the American public, which, by the way, is why I think Donald Trump picked many of them in the first place. They're good on TV. They're good salespeople. They are going to be good spokespeople for the Trump agenda.
Well, let's have a look here at Treasury Secretary designate Scott Bessent. He took the floor a little while ago. Have a look at this exchange he had with one of the senators about the subject of so-called green energy and China.
Now there is a big effort in the Trump administration to reverse it. I think that's going to be bad for the economy, but it is going to be damn good for China because we are in an arms race on clean energy with them.
Just so we can frame this for everyone in the room, China will build 100 new coal plants this year. There is not a clean energy race. There is an energy race.
I mean, I thought he had a very good point there, but also just the contrast between him and so many of these other nominees and the senators who've been questioning them, who've seemed downright, hysterical and almost unhinged. It's really quite a contrast.
It is. What you see is Democrat senators essentially trying to relitigate or re-argue the election, to say, oh, by the way, all the policies that we progressive Democrats offered the voters during the election, those are really the right policies. We know better than the voters. And then on the candidate, not the candidate side, but the nominee side, what you're saying is, look, here are the facts. And here's how we're going to go about putting into place the agenda that the voters actually voted for. So you see Ron Weinmont like that. I actually feel sorry for the guy because I'm not sure who he's talking to. Because every single thing he just said in that clip that you played has been rejected by the voters of the United States of America. So I'm glad to see the nominees standing up, being a lot more assertive. Look, I went through this 8 years ago when I was nominated for the cabinet in the first Trump administration. And what I was told by the Trump team, the original Trump team, was grin and bear it and just get confirmed. Clearly, the attitude has changed now to go on the offensive and say, no, you go out and you defend what we are going to do because we are deadly serious about doing it. And we're starting on day one.
Well, here's another example of that here. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State designate, talking to the Senate about Trump's foreign policy. Have a look at this.
But ultimately, under President Trump, the top priority of the United States Department of State will be the United States. The direction he has given for the conduct of our foreign policy is clear. Every dollar we spend, every program we fund, every policy we pursue must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make America safer? Does it make America stronger? Or does it make America more prosperous?
I mean, Mick, this is what the people voted for, and you can see why, versus, I think a foreign policy establishment that has sometimes, well, let's just say gotten a little bit away from those 3 points.
James, I haven't seen that clip until just now. I've seen a lot of the hearings. I didn't see that one. Marco's going to pass easily. There's always a sort of an agreement in the Senate that senators vote for other senators. Marco's coming out of the Senate. He's going to be easily confirmed. Most senators want to be in a cabinet in the future, so every senator agrees, you know what, we'll let you go. So it hasn't been the most contentious. But watching that clip, how refreshing is the clarity? How refreshing is the simplicity of the message, of the clarity of thought and of the focus to say, look, this is how we're going to do it. You never would have heard Rex Tillerson say that 8 years ago. And that's why I think you're in for an entirely different Trump 2.0 than you saw back in the first term.
Mick Mulvaney, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, and see you next week.
Thanks, James.